Hello, listeners, and welcome to the Sailing the East podcast. I'm TowBoatsUS, and I am hosting this episode solo today as my co-host Mike cannot make it. This is our podcast about sailing the east coast of the United States. In some episodes, we will focus on passages and destinations. In other episodes, we will talk about boats, equipment, and techniques. And when we come across an interesting person, we'll try to get them to be a guest on the show. So thank you for tuning in to today's podcast. Today, we have Simon and Sawyer Balint as guests on the podcast. They are repeat guests and were on this podcast in episode 29. In today's episode, we're going to discuss Simon and Sawyer's experience when they were anchored out during Tropical Storm Elsa when it hit the New England coast on July 9th, 2021. We discuss the decision-making process for evaluating their options, such as anchoring versus a mooring versus tying up at a marina. We also talk about what happened during the storm, what went well, and what they would do different, and why they called Harbor Patrol and TowBoatsUS. And they also had to reset their anchor during the height of the storm. We also covered the lessons they learned and how it was a positive experience for both of them. So let's jump into the discussion with Simon and Sawyer.
Ayla.
Hey, Simon and Sawyer, how are you?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm great, but I didn't spend the night out in the tropical storm like you guys did.
Oh, you would be even better if you did.
Yeah, maybe.
Life-changing event.
Oh, really? Oh, good. Well,
they're all life-changing events, just sometimes a small change.
Right. They're all life-changing events. Sometimes the only change is that you just can't get that hour back. All right. Well, hey, listen, I thought this was a great idea to get together and make a podcast out of your experience of anchoring out in Tropical Storm Elsa, which hit up on the East Coast a few days ago. And so I thought it'd be great to sort of talk about that a little bit. So if I remember correctly, you guys were out sailing for the week and you were in Provincetown. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And you guys were just hanging out there, sort of anchored out and enjoying life.
Yeah, we had a week trip planned where we left from Narragansett Bay and then up Buzzards Bay through the canal, picked up Elise, my wife, and then my daughter Hanika in Plymouth, because I think we mentioned last time, some other members of our family do enjoy sailing, but not the long hauls like that Sawyer and I do.
Yes.
So this was a nice way to pick them up, kind of near Boston, which is where my daughter lives, and then it's like a 3-hour sail over to Provincetown, and we had planned to stay there on a mooring for 3 nights, but all the while we were watching the weather forecast and looking at NOAA, National Weather Service, and predict wind and local weather, and the storm kind of kept getting closer, and the probability that it was going to be tropical storm force winds kept getting higher. So it was actually on the second day that we decided to change our plans.
Yeah. I mean, once it hit Florida, we probably had a good 3 or 3.5 days notice that it looked like pretty sure it was going to come up New England.
Yep.
Because it didn't veer much after that, right? It was pretty much sort of as planned or as predicted by the various different prediction agencies.
Yeah. And actually, I think, sorry, remember, we were sitting on the beach, I think, and we were thinking about how, it wasn't that long ago, like 60 years ago, if you were sitting on the beach on the day before the storm arrived, you wouldn't really know the storm was going to arrive the next day.
That's right.
I think it's, unless someone sent a telegram from, North Carolina saying, watch out, you had to look at the clouds or just sort of look at the waves or just be surprised.
Yeah.
So we did that. We had a lot of warning, relatively speaking, 3-4 days warning. And, but what did change is it went from, like less than 10% chance of tropical storm force winds, which are, I think, what's that sort of above 34
knots.
Yeah, 34 knots sustained. So went from like a 10% chance to a 20% chance to a 50% chance. And at that point we had already sort of made our plans, changed our plans, but we definitely knew that we had to find a safe anchorage.
Yeah. So you're in Provincetown, Anchorage, with the whole family, and then you say, okay, we're gonna cut this short. Did you sail the family back to Boston to drop them off, or take me through sort of that progression?
Well, I think there are kind of two factors. The first one was, what made the most sense logistically for our situation. When we were in Provincetown, we have 4 people on the boat. Simon and I are going to sail a boat back to Rhode Island, and then my mom and sister have their vehicle in Plymouth, Massachusetts. So at some point, we need to get to the vicinity of Plymouth. But at the same time, we have this weather constraint, which is that the tropical storm is going to come up the East Coast, and the farther east you are, the more severe it is. So we want to get as far west as we can. And Provincetown, Massachusetts, on the tippity top of Cape Cod, is about as exposed as you can be on the eastern seaboard. So, kind of weighing those two factors, we identified the Cape Cod Canal at the very southern end of it as a pretty good launching point. One, because it was fairly close driving distance to Plymouth. Our mom and sister could drive there. It was like a 25-minute Uber. But for us, it was a very significant change in terms of how much protection we had from the wind.
Remember, sorry, we stopped in Plymouth earlier in our trip, and Plymouth Harbor is certainly worth a visit. It's pretty cool, especially when you think about how the Pilgrims went there, in 1620. But it's a very, very exposed bay. It's really mostly like 2-3 feet deep, with a few channels, and you sort of kind of anchor kind of in a channel, and the sort of only designated space that you can anchor is at the far northern part of the bay, which means you've got all the fetch that there is in the bay. And if you were to drag, you're basically going to drag out of the channel into like 3 feet of water. So that was in our minds too, that we could sail back to Plymouth, drop off the rest of our family, but then we're kind of stuck in Plymouth, like the Pilgrim. We didn't want to be that.
Yeah. There's a lot of factors that goes into this sort of decision, and you have some constraints, but at the same time, you're trying to figure out both geographic location, east, west, north, south, and then the harbor itself where you're going to go into, and its parameters, right? And it's a multivariable equation, as us engineers would say. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, and even like in Provincetown, taking a step back, I mean, that's a decent harbor if the wind's coming from the prevailing west, but from the south, it's open, and there are moorings there, but then you're trusting the mooring, which maybe is okay to trust, but you don't know. And the only anchorage that's there is about 50 feet of water. So if you're going to do your storm force 7-to-1 scope, that's we need to go buy more chain. I think. So.
Right. Okay, so you guys took off. What day did you take off from Provincetown? You remember time and day?
Was it Thursday? Thursday morning?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, we got up and out around 9 o'clock on Thursday
morning, and the storm at that time was predicted to hit early Friday morning, like at 1 or 2 in the morning, I think, where we were.
I think the earliest, because we were looking at where it was going to hit in sort of near the canal. So the models were a little different, but on the most severe side, it looked like maybe morning-ish, 8 o'clock in the morning on Friday.
Yeah, because I guess I was further west than you, and I remember because so we were at the marina, we had been hanging around the bay, but coming back to the marina every night. And on Thursday, we decided, okay, we're going to stay on the boat. We're not going to leave and go home and sort of worry about the boat. We're going to stay on the boat. And the guy 2 boats down from me, who's been there on Narragansett Bay for a long time, came out to his boat and he started taking down his bimini and putting out double dock lines and stuff. So I said, okay, he knows what he's doing. So I start doing the same thing. And I think when I heard the weather forecast Thursday morning, I think they were predicting to hit where we were like 1 or 2 in the morning on Friday morning, AM. But then as the day progressed, it kept getting later and later and later and later.
Yep.
And,
yeah, no, it was of course a little uncertainty exactly when, but we knew that we had to get where we wanted to go by end of day Thursday for sure.
Yes.
That's why we left early in Thursday morning.
Sure. And so remind people, you guys were on the podcast on episode 29. So if people want to hear more about your boat and the decision process you went through to buy that and all that kind of stuff, but remind listeners, for those who haven't listened to that, what boat you have, what anchor you have, and how much chain you have, just sort of those technical parameters.
Yeah, go for it.
Certainly. Yeah. So it's a 40-foot Passport 40, 1989. Displacement is about 13 tons. We have a 25 kilogram Rockna, which is about 55 pounds. That's our primary anchor, with about 250 feet of chain. We also have a secondary anchor, which at the moment isn't rigged, but it's approximately a 50-foot or 50-pound Delta anchor. And we have a second set of chain for that as well. Our boat is actually equipped with 2 anchor rollers, so we could have both anchors rigged at the same time, but since we bought the boat, we haven't had to do that yet.
Yeah. What size is your chain? Do you know?
I'm sorry, Bailey.
Do you know what size your chain is?
I believe it's 5/8.
5/8. Yep.
5/8. I thought 5/16 is the standard. All right, whatever. The five something.
Yeah, I think it's probably 5/16 or 3/8.
Yeah, it's 5/16.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. And we do have a brand new Muir windlass, which I installed like 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Because the old one failed on us. So maybe we can talk about that later, but that was actually really, really useful and really important that we had a nice, fast working windlass.
Yeah. So you guys left Provincetown Thursday morning, 9-10 o'clock. You sailed to the canal. You dropped off the other 2 members of the crew.
Mm-hmm.
And then you went through the canal. And tell me about the process for sort of picking where you were going to stop. What were the parameters that sort of went into that?
Go for it, sir.
Well, I think a lot of it came down to actually just familiarity. We had stayed at this anchorage before, and so we knew exactly what we were getting into. We knew the depth, we knew the holding, and I think that made us feel a little bit more comfortable. Again, the time frame was on the tighter side, so we didn't want to roll into an anchorage Thursday night and decide that we don't like it, with the storm arriving Friday morning. So I think that was probably the largest factor for us. But this is a well-established anchorage and a popular anchorage for a good reason. It's well protected on all sides. The depth is probably about 14 feet. To give your viewers a sense, it's called Narragansett Bay, and the anchorage is essentially a rectangle with an island on either side of the rectangle, and then the 2 longer faces. On the one side is a channel, and on the other side is a mooring field. So protection on all sides, and good depth, and a lot of space. So you can pretty comfortably fit probably about a dozen boats in the anchorage.
Okay.
And it's also, keep in mind, it's sort of the first anchorage off the channel. Off the
canal.
Cape Cod Canal, from the south. So there's not a lot of sea there anyway. You're the very top of Buzzards Bay. Tucked in off the canal. So in terms of waves and fetch and seas, we thought that'd be pretty good. Wind was going to be what it was, going to be, but we did have a couple of lees of those islands.
Yeah.
That's what I mentioned.
Yeah, that's a good point, because the further west you go, past the canal, the more sort of open ocean from the south that you're exposed to.
Yeah, I think last time too, we talked about how we've learned a little bit that you've got to be focused on not just wind, but on the seas. And so, we go through predict wind, all the models, and, the wind is, the best case is in the 30s, the worst case is 50. The seas, the worst case was like 17 feet out near, kind of end of Buzzards Bay. That's a lot of water.
That's a lot of sea.
We wanted to be away from that for sure. And there's no way he's going to get that in this little bay.
Right. Very good. So what time did you guys pull into the bay approximately to onset?
It was like 3 o'clock because I know we dropped off, our family members right at 3, and then then we got back to the boat and started getting ourselves organized.
Yeah. And I think that's another good point you're making is that you don't want to get there too late, because you might get there and it's full. There's no place for you to anchor. So you got to have a plan B, right? And if you're pulling in at 8:00 at night, that's you don't have a plan B. So that's sort of another good point. You allowed enough time that if for whatever reason you didn't like it, or it was full or whatever, you could move on to some other alternative place.
Yeah, exactly.
So talk to me a little bit about deciding to, go into a marina and rent a slip for the night versus pick up a mooring versus anchoring out. What was sort of your thought process on that?
So, we went through a tropical storm, or it was myself last year, in a marina. We're in Narragansett Bay, and we had rented a mooring for the summer, and then we moved into a slip for the storm. And it was definitely the right call to move into the slip, but I will say it was a pretty stressful experience being on the boat, trying to manage lines and fenders. The wind speeds in that storm also were in the low 40s, and it's a lot to manage. So I don't know if we felt particularly comfortable trying to find a slip in a new marina that we weren't familiar with at all, and trying to get situated. A lot of the risk, whether it's in a marina or a mooring or an anchorage, is not your boat, but the boats around you and the infrastructure around you. So how secure is the dock? How secure are the cleats? How secure is the boat across from you in the slip?
Yeah. I mean, that was going through my mind up in Provincetown. We were thinking, do we try to see if we could get a mooring for an extra night or not? And then we came down to Onset Bay. Do we call the town until we get a mooring? I kind of have more faith in our boat because we know it than in, someone else's infrastructure. And maybe it's good, but we just don't know. And you hate to find out at the peak of the storm that, they haven't inspected that mooring, or that mooring is, not really well secured. Keep in mind too, moorings especially, they're tightly packed. They plan them so that they can get as many boats as they can into the field. So with a 40-foot boat, usually, we have like half a boat length behind us and the next boat. So really, there's no room for error if the other infrastructure starts to fail.
Yeah. Good, all good points. So I will say, when we were at the marina, our marina and our slip is the only sort of bit we have a little bit of exposure from is a direct south wind. So if we have the wind from directly south, we're pretty exposed wind-wise, and we can probably get some waves because there's a break there, but in a narrow entrance, but I'm sure it would get wavy. And the wind, all the wind predictions said the wind was going to be from the southeast, which we were super protected. For us, quite honestly, it was calmer there than in the typical Narragansett, sea breeze that picks up at 4:00 in the afternoon.
Every day, yeah.
Yeah, it was calmer. Now you could hear the wind ripping through the trees, on land and stuff, and you could hear it, but it was really very calm because we had that the wind was from that particular direction.
Well, and the thing is, you never know, right? So all these, of course, models are just models, and the forecast isn't down to your 500 square feet, right? So,
right.
I remember reading afterwards of the storm. I think the highest winds that we saw were about 45 knots, at least on our boat. You never know if we missed something, pop through. But I think there was a report on a buoy just outside Atlantic City of like 78 knots. There was one in like Nantucket at the airstrip of 60 knots. So you can get a little tiny gust, and actually, we talk about maybe a little later. We did drag a little bit at one point, and it was right at the moment that we got like a 43 knot gust that kind of hit us on the side, just as the boat was kind of swinging around. And so a bunch of windage there, and maybe the anchor road wasn't quite straight, and we slid a little bit.
Yeah. So you guys anchored. How much chain did you guys put out? You remember all of it?
No.
Nope. Well, so yeah, this is a good point. So we in terms of choosing our anchor spot, we picked a spot that I think would have been fully appropriate for a normal weekend day, which is to say that we were surrounded on all three sides by other vessels, probably like on average 4 to 6 boat lengths away from us. And so given that the maximum radius of the circle, so to speak, we put out 80 feet of chain in the 14 to 16 foot depth of water. In hindsight, it would have been more prudent to pick a spot where we had more room. One, so that we could put out more scope, but two, and more importantly, so that we had more options. As the storm progressed, the other boats around us ended up becoming a major source of anxiety. And if we had been positioned in a part of the anchorage that maybe was less protected, but where we had much more room to move, that would have greatly increased our options as the storm gained intensity.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So the lesson here is sacrifice maybe protection from wind and waves for closeness to other boats.
Yep. Yeah, we definitely had room to go forward a little bit. And if we had done that, I don't know that necessarily we needed more scope at that point. I mean, we're in 14 feet. We were at 5 to 1. In the end, I don't think we popped an anchor. It's just that, the wind was really strong and we actually sort of dragged through the mud a bit and we reset. But, when you drag back 40 feet and reset and you were only like 60 feet in front of the boat to begin with, now you're making that guy pretty nervous.
Right.
And so, yeah, we probably should have just, gone ahead, given ourselves extra room, basically giving ourselves like storm room. I think we gave ourselves, as Sawyer mentioned, what we thought was pretty normal anchoring room, but that's not really for a storm.
Yeah. Now, were you one of the last boats that pull into the anchorage, or did people come in after you guys?
No one came in like in front of us. Maybe one or something, way other side of the field, but no, it was pretty much it was pretty static after we got there.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you guys get there and you had a pretty quiet evening, right? And night, because the storm really didn't hit until morning. So that's another thing that I dread is being out in a storm like that in the dark when you can't see anything.
Yeah.
So
I mean, so taken all together, the only hairy experience we had, and we'll talk quite a bit about it, is the other boats around us. Otherwise, I think we fared pretty well, and we were sort of on top of things. But that was in the daytime, in an anchorage which we had been in before. So night would have been a really different story for sure. It's very difficult to gauge distance, in the dark. It's made me think. I don't know if you've used it, Bale, or anyone has used it. We do kind of trades, my day job, and they're like laser sighters that you can use to measure rooms and whatnot. I don't know if people use them on boats, because often you look behind you and you're like, is that boat like 40 feet away or is it like 200 feet away? And I don't know, kind of little laser pointers would be kind of cool. I don't know if they work at night. Yeah.
They should work at night because it's a own light frequency. I mean, golfers have them for finding.
Do they work at night when it's like howling rain?
Oh yes, yeah. The rain may be an issue. That's a good point. The rain may be an issue.
Yeah, daytime. Yeah, it definitely don't want to be dealing with that stuff at night. And that's maybe we kind of knew that we were dealing with a storm the next day, so we were gonna kind of assess things. I think the first indication that things were getting a little hairy was we were down below and we started hearing someone sort of like pulling up their chain or dropping their chain or some sort of commotion outside the boat. So that's when we ran up to check what was going on.
Yeah. So take us through that. Take us through the morning there. The storm the winds start increasing. It's daylight. You guys wake up. Take me through the next couple of hours.
Sure. So, when we woke up, it was still, very calm conditions, like maybe 12 knots overcast. And then over the course of the morning, it slowly built up. Maybe by 10 a.m., we were in the low 20s or so. And I think when we hit about 25 knots is when the boat upwind of us began having issues with their anchor. So, Simon actually saw it before I did, but I believe, yeah, so the boat upwind of us dragged, and we could see them through our side windows while we were hanging out down below. And we're like, that's, a strange time to be moving. And that was our first indication of, what was to come.
So they're the boat that was like just in front of us, and they were there when we pulled in on Thursday. They're like a 43 foot ish yawl, so a double masted boat, older boat, fair amount of windage, like a pretty high coach roof, and then of course 2 masts and 2 booms. Looked a little bit of like an older boat, and we only saw one person on the boat at the time. We found out later there was a second person. But yeah, that's the boat that, when we started getting into the mid upper 20s, they dragged, pulled up their anchor, moved actually directly in front of us at that point, but a little bit further away, and then reset the anchor. So yeah, when we saw that going on, we decided we better stay up on the cockpit and just sort of see what's going on. Again, our feeling that the greatest risk to us was, other boats. And so we saw them sort of like swinging around, trying to drop a reset anchor. And then I think Sawyer said, I think it's time to turn the engine on, which I've been thinking of too. So we turned the engine on. The idea being that we need to be ready to sort of take, evasive action maneuvers if the guys started coming down on us.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Did you?
And I think this was.
Go ahead. Sawyer.
I was going to say, I think this was an area where Simon and I did something right, which is we saw the situation and made a plan for what we would do if things got worse before we had to actually do the action. So of course, turning on the engine is a good first step. But then, Simon and I discussed, okay, what's our actual plan if, this boat starts to drag down on us or becomes tangled in our anchor. One of the things to remember, of course, when it's windy is once one person steps out of the cockpit, you really lose your ability to communicate with them verbally. So that's not the time to be figuring out, what the other party is doing on a double-handed boat. The plan we came up with, which in hindsight I think is still probably a good plan, was to release our anchor chain and, dump it into the water and then go without an anchor. And that would give us the most maneuverability.
If
our
you
anchor
would tangle with us.
Correct.
Yep.
Assuming
our anchor
right,
is
by him tangling with you basically makes your anchor non-functional. So if it's non-functional, what you're saying is you're going to jettison the anchor.
Yep. And so we had and I'd been up in the anchor locker when I was changing the windlass a couple of weeks ago, so I was pretty familiar with it. It's 250 feet of anchor road, and then it's actually tied off on a cleat up in there just to prevent you from accidentally letting all of your chain go. So the only step we would need to do is to untie that line and then let it go. Thinking back about it, probably just like we turned the engine on, we should have just untied that line because we weren't going to get into a situation where we were letting out 250 feet of chain. I mean, we were in 15 feet of water, but we maybe needed to just get rid of all the chain and take off. One thing that was really useful, it's a small investment we made last summer when we were up in Maine. We stopped at Hamilton Marine, which is like the cool boating real salty boating store in Maine, all the lobstermen use. And we bought a little like lobster crab pot buoy for $1.50. And we use that as our anchor buoy.
Yes.
We've got about 35 feet of rope tied to the anchor, and it's got little loops on it and a clip. So we can shorten that rope or lengthen that rope depending on how much depth we have. So if we're in like 20 feet of water, we'll shorten it down to like 25 feet. So the buoy is pretty much over the anchor. I mean, you shouldn't worry that much about your anchor. Worry more about your boat. But even if we let our anchor and chain go, we could go back later and find it and probably actually just pick it up ourselves.
Right. Yeah. And so so you had a plan. If these guys come down on us, foul our anchor, we're going to jettison the anchor. And did you have confidence that with a breeze like that, you can motor around and keep your boat steady and and in the bay, so to
Yeah,
speak?
so that's one of the things that was a new experience for us. It wasn't the first time that we had been out in 40 knots, but it certainly was the first time that we had to consider, low speed, high precision maneuvering in 40 knots. The other plan that we had considered, if the vessel was at risk of colliding with us, but maybe not entangling our anchor rode, would have been to, again, release all of the chain, but keep it connected to the boat. And then that would essentially give us a 500-foot diameter circle that we could operate within.
Yes.
And, well, when you're trying to avoid a 45-foot boat, 500 feet sounds like a lot of room. But later on in the storm, we did end up having to maneuver around our anchor. And looking back on it, I don't think it would have been very feasible for us to have any real degree of maneuverability in that wind at a low speed while still connected to the anchor. This goes back to the issue of how close we were to other boats when we anchored. There were 3 other boats who would have fallen within that 500-foot diameter circle. So you can imagine really the danger of us motoring around in these big circles, towing 250 feet of chain across other people's anchor roads. And it's actually very challenging to control the boat at low speed in high wind. So, when you're straight into the wind, you can add power and you can stay, with your bow into the wind, you can maintain a certain degree of control. But once the bow falls off, if you don't have any water going over the rudder, you end up kind of going sideways, and you go around the circumference of the circle, so to speak, but it's very hard to stay in the center of it.
Yeah. That's why docking when it's really windy is hard.
Exactly.
Because you're going slow and yeah.
Well, again, with our anchor buoy, we did at least know where our anchor was. So around this time, I think I mentioned before that we had a kind of a gust. We were probably getting, our sustained wind was, 36, 38, in the high 30s was sustained. And then we had a gust of, into the low 40s, and the boat was a little bit turned to the side, and it made us drag with our anchor. We held again, but now we were coming back. So at that point, Sawyer said, we better motor up and try to just kind of take some of the weight off the anchor so we don't drag any further. And it was difficult for him to do, but at least we knew where the anchor was. So he was trying to basically keep the bow pointed towards that anchor.
Yes.
Keep an even distance too. We didn't want to drive over our anchor and then pull it up the other way around.
Right. Right.
So that's what we kind of did while we watched this other boat. And going back to the boat. So after it dragged the second time, we weren't quite sure what he was doing. The person was in the cockpit. He didn't pull up his anchor. It was on a rope, but he was starting to motor around, and he at first we thought he was leaving, like he was going to leave the bay. But then he kind of came back around, and I guess what he was doing was just motoring around with his 50, 60 feet of line and the anchor dragging all over the place. We learned later when we saw everyone on board that he had another person, his partner, and she was holding a very young child, a couple months old. So I think probably, she was down below, maybe the baby wasn't doing well. And so he was just at the helm, and he really, with that much wind, he didn't have a chance to even run up to the deck and deal with his anchor. He also didn't have a windlass, or not one that wasn't working. So to run up and pull in all the line and pull the anchor up out of the mud wasn't possible. So he was just driving around with the anchor. He clipped our anchor buoy with his boat, and somehow his anchor didn't clip our anchor.
Oh wow!
Yeah, so that's just sort of, I'd love to see that underwater footage of the anchor passing by our anchor. But we were a little nervous for him. Obviously, he seemed like he was having some trouble, and we were nervous for ourselves. So we actually, at that point, we called the harbor patrol in the bay. The night before, or the afternoon before, we had gone to the dock to check it out, and we saw that there was a harbor patrol there. So we called and just to say, hey, there's a boat out here that's having trouble with their anchor. They've dragged twice. Seems like they're not able to set. I'm not sure if you could provide assistance. We had tried to radio the boat first, but he didn't respond. Maybe he was just too busy.
Yeah.
So we decided actually, just to let the local folks know. And they came out. They were out in a couple minutes, which was, I think in the end, really, really useful. The Harbor Patrol came out. They sort of saw what was going on, and then they must have radioed TowBoatUS, which also had a boat in the bay. And TowBoatUS came out. They came to our boat first to see if we were in trouble, and we said, no, it's this boat in front of us. And then they approached that boat, tried to offer some help.
Oh, wow. And what did they do for that other boat?
Yeah, so the TowBoatUS actually made a very, very big difference in the situation. They were able to put the catch on a stern tow, which kept the sailboat stabilized in the wind, and then allowed the owner to leave the cockpit and then deal with his anchor. That was kind of the real missing piece of the puzzle in this situation was how is he going to get his anchor up, because you can't reset it otherwise. So by putting him on a stern tow and stabilizing the boat for him, he was able to retrieve the anchor. The two vessels together then relocated to a more protected part of the anchorage to attempt to anchor. They tried to anchor twice, but neither attempt was successful. So after retrieving the anchor, after those attempts, they then motored over to behind a second island where there were some town moorings available. And that proved to be the best and solution to the problem.
Oh, very nice. So could you describe what a stern tow is for those folks who don't know what that is?
Yeah, certainly. It's perhaps maybe the most stereotypical version of towing. So you take a line from the towboat, so in this case, TowBoatUS, and they trail it over the stern of their boat. And in this case, has a bridle. So it has two lines, and you put those over the bow cleats of the boat that's going to be towed.
So that's attaching to the bow of your vessel, the one vessel that's being towed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. I think it proved to be a little bit challenging because, again, they had to tow the vessel via the bow while also pulling up the anchor. And there were a couple of times, hearing over the radio where the anchor was getting caught in the tow line. But overall, it proved to be a safe and effective solution.
And the guy's pulling his anchor up by hand, I think, is what you said, right?
Yeah. It was not. Yeah, maybe his windlass failed, just bad luck, or maybe he didn't have a windlass, which everyone has. But if you don't have a windlass and you're potentially going to be a solo sailor, basically, because your other dependents can't help you, I don't know that he should have been anchoring, in that tropical storm. Because once things went bad, he really didn't have a plan B.
Yeah.
I mean, his only plan B was to drive around to stay out of the way of other boats with 50 feet of anchor dragging beneath him. And it was rope too. So, we were actually worried it was going to foul his prop. And then
that's really big trouble.
And he's just a floating missile.
Yeah.
So he's gonna...
Yeah. So but
it was good. Sometimes in the radio, at least for me, I'm sometimes a little nervous. Like, do I call towboat, do I call the Coast Guard? Do I call the harbor master? So you kind of don't want to do it, or at least that's my thought process. But once we did, I think it was really the right decision. We called them. They seemed happy to help. And once they came out, they really did change the dynamic of the situation.
Yeah.
When the towboat first approached, the guy waved him off. He didn't want help. And that's also maybe human nature, right? I got it.
Right.
I'm fine.
Right.
I'm alone. He actually radioed like, I'm good. Just I'm good. I'm go away. And towboat actually didn't go away. They just sort of hung out like right in front of him.
Yeah.
And then the guy got on the radio again. He's like, hey, what are you guys doing? And towboat said, hey, they were really friendly. Like, we definitely can help you. It seems like the problem is you can't get up to the bow. But if we do a stern tow, we'll basically, stop your boat in its tracks, just like you're parked. And then you can come up and deal with your anchor. And then, we can set, help you set again. And you'll be all set. And so they did a good sort of almost like hostage negotiation with the guy.
Yeah. Well, that's a good story because it also, the lesson there is don't be ashamed or don't be bashful about calling.
Yeah.
Right. Because you're right. Everyone's sort of hesitant. No. It's like, it's a sign of weakness if you call for help. right? But this is
Yeah, we did. I don't want to be like, judging this guy or, getting him in trouble, whatever. But we called and said, hey, there's a person here that may need some help. Why don't you come out and take a look? We tried him on the radio.
Right.
He's not responding. So maybe you guys could come over and talk to him.
Yeah. But I meant that from my perspective. Like if I feel uncomfortable and I feel like I'm getting it over my head, right? Yeah. I shouldn't be fearful of calling for assistance.
No, and in this
because
case,
these guys are pros. This is what they do. They probably know more about how to handle this situation than I do. Chances are.
No, absolutely. And both the harbor master and the towboat especially, I mean, they were very courteous, professional. I mean, I think the towboat guys realized the owner of this other boat is probably pretty stressed. Now we know probably extra stressed because he had a young child on board. And so, we're not going to make him feel bad. We're going to sort of be a team member with him and help him out.
Right.
And that definitely worked.
Exactly. I think that's a good takeaway from this, right? It's good to call. If you need assistance, go ahead and call. Don't wait.
Yep. For sure.
Because then you're calling for assistance for them to pick you up out of the water.
File an accident report.
Right. So they took that other boat over to a mooring, and so they got nice and secure. Were there any other boats that dragged, or any other issues that popped up?
Well, I guess we might fall into that category. Right as the vessel was navigating to the mooring is when we hit our highest sustained winds, and then subsequently dragged about a boat length. And again, a lot of it goes back to where we had anchored. It's not uncommon for anchors to drag, and then if you have a modern anchor or one of the newer generation anchors, they reset, and ours reset just fine. But we left ourselves with a pretty small margin of error, and so now, even though we had to reset, we had to reposition. And if we'd been in a different spot, it would have reset. We would have reset our anchor alarm, and we would have been back at square one. So, what had happened was we dragged a little bit, and now we were uncomfortably close to the boat to leeward of us. And I was concerned that we were going to drag again. Because if we did, then we would be at risk of colliding with that boat. So at that point, I used the engine to both take some strain off the anchor, but I think more my subconscious thought was to give me a little more control over the situation, and be less reliant on the anchor as a single piece of gear. But I will say, in hindsight, it seems intuitive. Like, okay, if I just motor forward in neutral or with a little bit of RPM, then that would just take some strain off the anchor. It's not that simple at all. And I learned that the hard way. What ends up happening is, most vessels sail a little bit at anchor. They go 20 degrees port, 20 degrees starboard, and most boats of a similar configuration, in this case we were surrounded by sailboats, they all perform in kind of a similar way. They react to the gust the same way, and they all maintain the same spacing. But when you start adding engine power to the mix, it really changed the dynamic. So we started sailing at a different rhythm, so to speak, than the boats around us, and started sailing much more severely. And so not only did it require some additional power from the engine, it was very aggressive helm to try and keep the boat under control and away from the boat to leeward, which was the original goal in the first place.
You mentioned something there, that I think also maybe another point. We always use an anchor alarm, whenever we anchor, and what most people do. There's several free apps. What was really useful about having the anchor alarm is it shows you where you can set the position, approximate position where your anchor is, and then it plots your location for your boat every whatever minute or 2 minutes or some sort of increments. So we could see the arc where our boat was when we first were set, and then suddenly, we were back about 40 feet, which was clear to us that we had dragged. So first of all, we knew for sure we had dragged because we could just look at the anchor alarm. But then we also knew we weren't dragging anymore, but we kept our eyes on that alarm chart to see, if we were staying still, or we were dragging any further. Of course, rain was pouring down, and we used an iPad for that. So at some point, a massive raindrop hit the app and closed it. So we were like, whoa, what happened? What happened? We dried it off and we got it back and we could see where we were again. But anyway, that was really useful. So anchor alarms are not just for like waking up in the middle of the night when you drag, but just giving you another point of reference.
Yeah.
Where were you? Where are you now? That was really useful.
Yeah. Yeah. So did you guys end up moving or did you just keep the pressure on and monitor the situation?
No, we moved.
Okay. So
we did, yeah. And really the constraining factor was we were waiting for that catch to clear the area because we were essentially going to take his spot, move up to where his boat was. So once towboat had sort of towed him out of the anchorage, it was clear that he was going to be hanging to the moorings. That's when we made our move. We, again, another scenario that Simon and I briefed beforehand. So we knew that he was going to be going up to the anchor. I was going to be on the helm, try and keep it head to wind. And I communicated and we established that, we were not really going to be able to maneuver. We were going to go straight upwind. We're not going to go circling around the anchorage looking for the best spot. Once the bow was in the wind, that's where it was going to go. And we could either go forward or backwards. One thing that, Bale, I think actually you taught us when Simon and I were beginning to sail was the use of hand signals for anchoring. I know different people have different methods of communication, but for Simon and I, the hand signals worked really well, and they were invaluable in this situation because in 40 knots of wind, there's no verbal communication,
right,
no matter how loud you shout. And so in this case, it was hard to see the anchor buoy. From the cockpit, it's impossible to know where you are in relation to the anchor when you get close. And from Simon's perspective, it's hard to know what I'm doing at the helm. Is the wind pushing the boat or am I turning the boat? But the use of simple and clear hand signals was instrumental in this case to getting the anchor up quickly, repositioning to a new location, and dropping it while reversing. And
just so you know, like our hand signals that you taught us, Bale, is thumbs up is forward, thumbs down is backwards, a closed fist means stop, and then you can put a index finger pointing to the right or the left. And then if you're really nuanced, which we weren't at this point because you couldn't, hear or see, you can make a little gap with your thumb and your index finger to say a little bit forward or a little bit, backward.
Yep.
But we use it all the time. We don't yell at each other. We don't, use radios. The other method you see out in the water is, two people fighting and bickering and yelling at each other because, they're, but we don't, we just have those simple hand signals and they work great for us. And, we also, you learn over time, how to sort of lead the action, right? So I'll put my fist out a couple seconds before I actually want it to stop because I know it takes a second to put it, into neutral and the boat to slow down. So
yeah, that's when the wind's blowing at 10 knots, not 40.
Yeah. So yeah, we had the hand signals was really good. Knowing where our anchor was again really useful.
Yeah.
As much as possible, we had to get the bow of the boat towards the anchor so we could pull it up straight and pull up fast. And then having this brand new windlass was a dream. We didn't realize what a windlass is supposed to do until we got the new one. It's not supposed to make a lot of noise.
Yeah.
Not supposed to grind. It's supposed to zip the line up and zip the line down. And we pulled that anchor in what do you think, Sawyer? Less than a minute, 30 seconds maybe?
Yeah, I think the whole maneuver was done in less than 2 minutes from anchor set to anchor set.
Wow. Yeah, pull the anchor, move head, drop it, and then we just this time we dropped 120 feet, almost 9 to 1.
Yep.
And locked it, and let our boat drag back. We didn't really need to motor back because the boat was dragging back pretty fast and set nicely, and it was good. So having that right gear was really important. Having the experience Sawyer and I have how to communicate was important. That was really useful to be able to redo that in a again in sustained 40 knots.
Yeah. Now I know where we were, which was, 40, 50 miles east of you guys or west of you guys. The wind was from the southwest and then there was a period of time where the wind sort of died down. It almost looked like the sun was going to come out. And I said, "Oh, the storm's over." I think this was like, I don't know, 1:30, 2 o'clock, something like that in the afternoon. And then all of a sudden it started raining again, and the wind shifted from the north to the north, right? It went from southeast to like northwest. And I think so. The eye of the storm must have been pretty close to where we were. So did you guys experience something like that?
Yeah, so very, very similar. That it calmed down. We thought, oh, we're good. A little bit of blue sky, and then the wind came from the north. But even the second go around, it was maybe down to 30. It wasn't quite as high as the first go around.
So when go ahead. I'm sorry. Keep going.
Oh, and we were at that point we were pretty far away from other boats, so we could move around. When we did move up that first time, we want to get away from the boats behind us, but we did keep in mind that likely the storm was, it's a low, it's going to cycle around. So we didn't want to get too far away and therefore too close to the next shore.
Yeah.
We need to be able to.
So when the anchorage went through that 180-degree wind shift, did that cause any other havoc with other boats?
No, it didn't actually. And I was prepared for it because, it essentially was going to put us now on the leeward side of the anchorage. And so I was concerned that now we're going to have to deal with, dragging boats part 2. But no, everybody held. The round 2 of the storm was, very uneventful, actually.
Very good. Very good. So we've been going at this 50 minutes now almost. So I want to start wrapping it up. So what would be the sort of takeaways that you got from this experience?
I'll start with a couple, Sawyer, and then you can do a couple. So
go for it.
Yeah. First of all, every time we go out, you learn something new, and we appreciate all the different things that we experience. So this wasn't a bad experience. It was, a nice learning experience for us. I think the number one takeaway was, be prepared to change your plans. They say the most dangerous thing is a schedule, right? So we had this family vacation. We had 3 nice days planned in Provincetown, and we gave up that last day because we thought things could be bad. So I think changing plans is good to be prepared to do. And I'd say for me the experience of, I mentioned before, talking to the harbor master, getting TowBoatUS involved. That's kind of outside my normal comfort zone, but I think it was a good thing to do, and I'll be more prepared to do that in the future, maybe more quickly.
Yeah. Excellent. How about you, Sawyer?
Yeah, I think one of the big takeaways for me was the usefulness of, briefing our plans before we had to actually do them, because we ended up doing that a few times. And, for Simon and I, especially, we've been sailing together extensively for a few years now, and we work together. So there's a lot of unspoken communication where we just sort of assume and understand what the other person's doing. But in these abnormal situations, it's really important, I think, to put things into words, just to make sure everybody's on the same page. And we made a conscious effort to do that, and I think it made a difference. Certainly when we had to reposition and re-anchor, it was really useful to know that we both knew exactly what was going to happen in that 2 minutes.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think there were some elements where if we were to go through another tropical storm, we might do things a little bit differently. One of them, of course, would be selecting our anchor site maybe differently, to not be so close to other vessels, both for vessels dragging into us and in case we drag or we need to reposition. It would have been much less stressful if we had a larger radius around us. And, again, talking about planning, one element that we had partially planned, but maybe didn't plan as well as we could have is, okay, so if we release our anchor because the other person, gets tangled in it, or we decide it's the best thing to do for maneuverability, what's our plan after that? We had one, but it was not a very effective one. Our second anchor at the time was buried at the bottom of our cockpit locker. And so the process of dragging that up on deck and rigging up our second chain and feeding it through the windlass
Yeah.
in 40 knots of wind, it would have been possible, and it would have been a real pain. But our boat is fully equipped for 2 anchors. So the night before, we could have set everything up and had a full second redundant anchor ready to go. And when you're anchoring in a tropical storm, that's really your primary line of defense.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, in this situation, since you were in an anchorage that had moorings, I guess plan B could have been, if you dropped your anchor, was to go over and pick up a mooring, as opposed to your secondary anchor.
Could have been, but there was and we learned this later, a bit of chatter between the harbor master and this boat because there's not a lot of depth over there in the field. And the harbor master was concerned that the winds were blowing some of the water away from where the field was. So the other boat actually had 5.5 feet of draft, which is what we had. And there was a bit of back and forth about, okay, can he get in? I'm not sure. Let's have him try. So yeah, that would have been maybe a plan C. Sawyer's right, for sure. We have the gear. Thursday night we sat around, had pizza, and looked at our iPhones. We should have spent half an hour, pulled that anchor out, got ready to have 2 anchors. And I think we certainly will in the future.
Yeah.
As that's like one of the checklist items for any time we're going to be anchoring in some heavy weather.
Yeah, that's a good point. Good point. Now, let me ask you one other question. As you were talking about the fella that dragged and it looked like his partner and maybe a young child were there. So he was fundamentally a solo sailor. So I'm always interested in sort of solo sailors and sort of how they cope with these types of things. So given your experience and what you observed there, would you say that if one of you came in solo, or one of you was incapacitated, right, and only one of you could sort of, do what you needed to do, would you lean more towards getting a mooring or finding a dock space as opposed to anchoring?
I probably hadn't thought it through. I'll speak for myself, but having witnessed that, I'm less confident in my ability as a solo sailor in those circumstances. I've sailed by myself a little bit, coming up actually when Sawyer couldn't come with me. It's fine when everything's working great, but it goes south quickly, as it was with this guy. So yeah, and it's not, we have good gear, right? We have a nice windlass, but that could still get jammed up, or the fuse could blow.
Right.
It doesn't take much, and normal solo sailing, you run down below and you fix something because nothing's going on up top. But that would not have been possible in this situation. So yeah, I think my decision would have been grab a mooring.
Yeah. How about you, Sawyer?
And so you were solo when you did the marina last time.
Elaine was there, so Elaine and I were there. But yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. You were talking about Sawyer. You were asking Sawyer.
Yeah, I would say so. Certainly, the difference between one person and 2 people is exponential in terms of, what you can do with manpower. But I think the other element too is just have a second person to bounce ideas off of.
Yeah.
I mean, I would like to think that both Simon and I are fairly thoughtful, but, being able to discuss these issues and come up with a plan was really, really useful for me. And I think I'd feel nervous trying to make all those decisions myself.
Yeah.
We talked through the scenario of like, okay, when this guy comes down and drags our anchor, what do we do? And so it's like, well, we'll try to maneuver around and we'll just let out all the anchor. And I was like, really? He's like, yeah, we'll just let it out and we'll drive around too. And I was like, oh, that makes sense.
Now you got 2 boats driving around in the anchorage playing bumper cars.
Yeah, but yeah, I don't know. Sometimes, and you don't like normally. A terrible scenario is you let out all your anchor rode and the anchor falls down into the bottom of the ocean, right? Oh, I lost it. So you're trained not to do that. But then you're like, oh wait, that would be like the best course of action in this situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we talked that through and then realized that. So that was good.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point, right? When you're by yourself, not only are you physically by yourself, but mentally you're by yourself.
For sure. And emotionally. Yeah. Maybe one more thing too that I'd say is this was not that much of a storm, right? As storms go.
Yeah.
So this was like I said, sustained high 30s, maybe close to 40, maybe a gust of 45 where we were. So nothing really to write home about. But we did drag at 45, and with some pretty good gear in pretty good holding mud. So I certainly think we've learned that we really can't anchor in much worse than that. Or we need a much bigger anchor or 2 anchors or something different. So I didn't realize that. So now I know. If I see a storm coming that's 40, 35, 40, we need to be prepared that we're going to get into some, dicey situations.
Yeah.
So that's a learning experience too. Like, I don't know, how do people survive 60 knots, 80 knots? That's a whole nother kettle of fish. But 35, 40s, we learned is about as much as we can do.
Yeah. Well, that's a good data point to have, right?
Yeah.
You sort of, okay, this is close to our limit. So if something stronger is coming, then we need to and plan out a different alternative.
And be mindful too that 35, 40 in a little harbor is different than 35, 40 way out.
That's right.
We've had that before. We've had a gust. It also can add some stress, but you got lots of sea room. You just sort of turn downwind, or you whatever.
Right.
It's different when you're in a confined space.
And where you guys were, when I looked on the chart, it was really well protected, so you didn't have much fetch. So
no,
you might have had 40, 45, but you had no seas to deal with, right? So imagine if you had 7 or 8 foot seas plus that wind, and trying to deal with bringing up an anchor, et cetera, right? I mean,
and dark.
And the dark.
So this would be this lesson for us, maybe lesson for people that listen. 35 knots, that can be that can be bad in the wrong set of circumstances.
Right.
With some seas at night, it's all it takes is for 35, 40 for things to get kind of bad. So keep that in mind.
Yeah. Well, excellent. Any other parting thoughts or things you want to share about your trip and the experience?
Well, it was great. I really liked it. I really liked this one. We learned a lot for sure. We're better prepared.
I did too. It's it's a humbling experience, and it's it's one more data point. It's a confidence builder in a sense. You know, if we're faced with this situation again, I think we'll handle it better.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, hey, thanks for being on the podcast, and thanks for sharing your experience. I think this will be a great episode. Thanks, guys.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bela.
Boy, those were some great lessons from Simon and Sawyer. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. Thank you for joining us for another episode. I hope you found today's podcast interesting and thought-provoking. If you have any questions or suggestions for the podcast, please get in touch with us. Our email is sailingtheeast@gmail.com. We always enjoy hearing from our listeners. If you enjoy the podcast, hit that follow button on your favorite podcasting app. If you would like to support the podcast, at the bottom of the show notes, you will see a link that says Support This Podcast. Click on the link and you can make a pledge of as little as 99 cents a month to help defer the cost of producing this show. We sure do appreciate it. We will be spending most of the summer sailing on Paradox, our Hunter 45 deck salon, in and around Narragansett Bay, Long Island Sound, and Buzzards Bay. Hope to see you out on the water. So until next time, signing off from upstate New York. See you soon.